So thank you all for coming tonight and having me as part of your presentation. Melanie contacted me and asked me to give this presentation about the Endrew F case, which I don't know, just by show of hands, anybody in the room familiar with this, what it means, what it is? Okay, a few, so we'll start from the beginning. FAPE is Free Appropriate Public Education is what that stands for. That's the acronym, and that's provided in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which is federal legislation that provides for special education and related services for eligible children. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about tonight is preschool through K-12. Can go up to age 21, but graduation from high school. So again, that's provided in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is what you may hear it referred to. And that is very popular in schools. Obviously, any student, eligible student with a disability who's enrolled in a public school is entitled to a free, appropriate public education. So the issue is, though, this term, free, appropriate public education, we know what free is, we know what public education is, but what's appropriate? That's a term that I may have a different definition for, you may have a different definition for, and we've got a third one over here that's very different. The last time that the Supreme Court of the United States took this up was back with Amy Rowley in the case of Board of Education v. Rowley back in 1982. So whenever we got the Endrew case in 2017, that was the first time since 1982 that the Supreme Court had addressed the issue of FAPE. What does FAPE actually mean and what does it provide? So I thought for the purposes of our discussion, which I do want it to be a discussion, feel free to stop me if you have any questions tonight and we can discuss these matters. But for the purpose of our discussion this evening, it would be best to start at the beginning with the Rowley case and talk about that, what the court held, and then move forward to how we got up to Endrew, which was decided in 2017. So for Amy Rowley, Amy was a kindergarten student going into the first grade, and she had a hearing impairment. Very bright student, was doing quite well in all of her studies in school, but again, she had this hearing impairment. And the district proposed for her hearing impairment that they would use an FM transmitter, which essentially is a small microphone that Amy would wear in her ear, and the teacher would be wired with a mic so that whatever the teacher said would be projected directly into Amy's ear. Her parents, however, would prefer for Amy to have an ASL interpreter in the classroom so that she got all of her instruction through sign language interpreting. Amy, again, was doing very well. She was above average in her class, and she was advancing grade to grade. There was no question about that, but it was clear that she understood less in the class than what she could have understood had she not had this hearing impairment. She wasn't absorbing 100% of the information that was being presented to her. So there was this dispute between the parents and the school district. The parents wanted an ASL interpreter. The school district said, no, all we're providing is an FM transmitter for Amy, and this matter went up through the course and made its way all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is what the Supreme Court had to say about the case. They said the basic floor of opportunity provided by the Act, which is the IDEA, consists of access to specialized instruction and related services which are individually designed to provide educational benefit to the handicapped child. Now this is 1982, that's the court's language, not my language. So for those who aren't familiar with IDEA, the way this process works is we have an IEP team, or an ARC as we call it in Kentucky, that stands for Admissions and Release Committee. They get together and they take a look at what the child's present levels of performance are, and then what their goals are, where we want them to go, and then how we're going to get there through special education and related services. Here the court said there's no requirement that the state maximize the potential of children with disabilities commensurate with the opportunities provided to other children. And this was really Amy's parents' argument. They said if she had an ASL interpreter, she would be able to absorb more of the information in the classroom, and she would be more on par with her non-disabled peers. But the court rejected that argument. And that's a hard pill to swallow, obviously, certainly if you're Amy's parents or a parent of any child with a disability. The court said the first inquiry that the courts go through in reviewing these cases brought to the pursuant to the Act is twofold. First, they want to look to see if the school has complied with the procedures set forth in the Act. So first we're looking just for procedural compliance with the law itself. And then second, whether the individualized program developed through the Act's procedures is reasonably calculated to enable the child to receive educational benefits. And that's the prong that Amy's parents were arguing. They said just by providing this FM transmitter, this is not reasonably calculated to provide FAPE, or free appropriate public education. In the Rowley decision, the U.S. Supreme Court specifically declined to establish any one test for determining the adequacy of educational benefits for all children covered by the Act. They said we're looking at Amy only in this situation. We're not looking at all children. This is a very individualized determination, just like it is when the ARC or the IEP team meets to put these programs together. So the court said, Amy's performing better than the average child in her class, and she's advancing grade to grade. And that's kind of what they hung their hat on in this situation, because she's performing better than most of her peers, she's advancing grade to grade, she's being provided with FAPE. This is very important because, again, this was the last time since 2017 that the United States Supreme Court spoke on this matter, and this is all we really had to guide us from the highest court in the United States. So a lot of school districts and circuits within the United States were interpreting this to mean, and rightfully so, would go up through the circuit courts, and they were told that they were correct in many situations, that we have, if you're providing educational benefit that allows the student to advance from grade to grade, then that is FAPE. That is sufficient for FAPE. Now, this is another case that often we don't talk too much about. FAPE according to Deal. So this is the Zachery Deal decision that came out of the 6th Circuit, which the 6th Circuit, Kentucky is in the 6th Circuit. The 6th Circuit is one step below the Supreme Court. So the decisions that are made by the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals are binding within the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And this kind of took the Rowley decision one step further. So Kentucky was a little bit unique, and this is important to remember as we start to talk about the Endrew decision. Zachery was a kindergarten student, I believe. He had progressed through preschool within the district. He had autism. His parents, very early on in his preschool education, began providing a one-to-one ABA therapist program in their home. And they saw a lot of benefits from that private program that they were providing in their home, the one-to-one ABA therapist. So shortly after they started doing that program themselves, paying for it themselves, and noticing the benefit that their son received, they asked the school district to begin paying for that program and to provide it through the summer as well. The school district denied that. They said, no, we're not going to provide a one-to-one ABA program to your son in the summer or even in the school program at all. And when you read the Deal opinion, it's really unclear what services the district was providing to Zachery regarding his autism. There were some related services being provided, but there's no real focus whether there was ABA, well, clearly there was an ABA, or some other alternative method. It doesn't seem like the district was really doing anything there. They just kind of rejected that altogether. The court did note that through the preschool program that was offered to Zachery, he only attended about 16% of the time of the program that the district offered. And the parents, despite the school district not paying for the private program, continued to pay for the private program out of their pocket. So every year they would come and they would say, this program's working really well, we think you ought to pay for it, and every year the district would say, we're not going to pay for it. Eventually, the school district presented a draft IEP, which is the plan that all students with disabilities under the IDEA get, which set forth the services that we're going to provide, the goals that we're going to work toward for the student, their present levels of performance. That draft IEP was presented to the parents, and it provided for attending kindergarten 3 times a week for 15 minutes, and then increasing that to try to acclimate Zachery to the kindergarten environment. The parents were not satisfied with that, as you can imagine. They were not happy that their son was only going to be attending kindergarten 3 days a week, 15 minutes each day. And they ultimately filed this action, and they asked the court to determine this matter. They said, listen, the school district has failed to provide our son with a free, appropriate public education that's based on his needs and his condition. I note in this case, this was a 27-day hearing initially for this. That is extremely long. I mean, there are criminal capital murder cases that don't last 27 days. That seems to be an issue nationwide, with these hearings lasting an extremely long time. I say that just to, if you've never been through the process, it can be extremely grueling both for parents, for teachers who are involved, who are testifying, the school district. It's something that in most situations everyone would just prefer not to engage in that level of conflict. But that's what it takes to get these decisions that we have. So in any event, this matter proceeded through and it went all the way up to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, which again is binding in Kentucky. And they said federal courts are generalists. We don't have any expertise in the educational needs of children with disabilities. And we will benefit from the fact-finding of a state agency with expertise in the field. And that means that, in general, as far as the facts go, we're going to defer to the state agency that conducted that 27-day hearing. We're not going to get too in the weeds on the facts. So less weight, however, is due to an agency's determination on matters for which educational expertise is not relevant, because a federal court is just as well suited to evaluate the situation. More weight, however, is due to the agency's determination on matters for which educational expertise is relevant. So that basically says that, if these are factual matters that involve educational expertise of the parents, of the teachers, of the principals, of the school administrators, we're going to defer to them on those matters. But just interpreting the law, we're not going to defer to the lower court or the hearing officer in that matter. So the Deal court said the court should strictly review an IEP for procedural compliance. Again, that's what the Rowley court said as well. We're going to check the first prong as procedural compliance. Although technical deviations will not render the IEP invalid. So small technical deviations, the court said, we're not going to worry about that. Next, the court must assess whether the IEP developed through those procedures was reasonably calculated to enable the child to receive educational benefit. That's very similar language to the Rowley decision from the United States Supreme Court. But here's the important language that we take away from Deal. The court said, we agree that the IDEA requires the IEP to confer a meaningful educational benefit gauged in relation to the potential of the child at issue. So that's more than that, very bare minimum standard that the Rowley court set. Here we've got meaningful educational benefit. And that's been in place in Kentucky since 2004. You'll see that's a 2004 decision. So then we move along to the Endrew F case. Again, this was decided by the United States Supreme Court in 2017. Endrew was a 4th grader with autism. This case came out of Colorado. He exhibited behaviors that impeded his access to learning. He would have some screaming, climbing, running away. He had fears of flies and restrooms. But the issue that Endrew's parents had is that his goals were essentially carried over year to year. So the same goals that he had in 2nd grade were carried over to 3rd grade, and the same goals again were carried over to 4th grade. They didn't see that we were really setting any type of ambitious goals to really push Endrew forward regarding his education. So the parents were presented the draft IEP for the 5th grade year, and once again, it looked like those goals were being carried forward once again. Same goals again. So they withdrew Endrew and they enrolled him in a private school specifically for autism. They noticed nearly immediate progress in this private program, where they felt that he really wasn't progressing much. Second, third, fourth grade year, immediately whenever he enters this private program, they begin to notice progress. So the parents filed a due process action to recover their private school tuition. They said, school district, we want you to give us our money back because you haven't been providing our son with FAPE. And he's now getting the FAPE in this private placement that we paid for out of our pocket, so you need to reimburse us because that's your responsibility to provide FAPE. That's the argument. The hearing officer, which is the first level where these hearings are heard, the district court and the court of appeals all ruled in the school district's favor. They told the parents that they were not entitled to repayment, that the school district had provided their son with FAPE. Now what's important here is that deal decision we just talked about, meaningful educational benefit commensurate with the student's abilities, did not apply in Colorado. That was a Sixth Circuit decision. Colorado's in the 10th Circuit. The 10th Circuit in Colorado applied a different standard based on Rowley, and that was the de minimis standard, which was essentially you have to provide the student with benefit that is just more than not enough to really consider. It was a pretty minimal standard. I think that clearly that's different than the standard that was being applied in Kentucky. And the circuits were split in that matter. Colorado in the 10th Circuit, there were several other circuits that were applying that same standard, and then Kentucky, as well as a few, we were kind of in the minority, were applying what I would consider to be a more heightened standard. So, the U.S. Supreme Court took this case up, and this is language from the opinion that I think is important for us to look at. They said a school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. That's much more than that de minimis standard, slightly more than de minimis standard that was applied by the 10th Circuit. Any review of an IEP must appreciate that the question is whether the IEP is reasonable, not whether the court regards it as ideal. So they still said, we're not going to go as far as to say that it's the most ideal situation. They backed off of that a little bit, but this is a huge step forward from that 10th Circuit standard of slightly more than de minimis. The court did reject the parents' argument that FAPE requires equality of opportunity to children without disabilities. And that kind of goes back to that same language that was in the Rowley opinion. They said it doesn't have to be equality of opportunity, which again is kind of a hard pill to swallow for a parent and for teachers as well, I would say. So when you read the Endrew opinion, and I will tell you, I printed out some that you all are welcome to take with you. I don't have enough for everyone. I didn't know how many people we would have. And in case you haven't heard, our state's on a skeleton budget right now. Just had a little bit of a budget reduction. So there's both the opinion and there's also a question and answer document that we'll talk about in a little bit. There are 5 copies of each of those, and I can send you all links for distribution if you all have a distribution list after the meeting as well.
This is something to distribute.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So if you read the opinion, which I would encourage all of you to read the Endrew F. opinion, it's really well written and it's easy to read. Some opinions from the Supreme Court are not easy to read, but this is one that is really easy to read and it's an interesting read. It seems that the court established 2 different standards in the Endrew opinion. So first of all, they go back and they apply Rowley again, and they say for students who are fully integrated in the regular classroom, then we're going to apply that same standard that we set forth in Rowley. That is, so long as the student is achieving passing marks and advancing grade to grade, then they've been provided with FAPE. However, if the student is not fully integrated in the regular classroom or not able to achieve at grade level, then they apply this slightly different standard that we heard about. So if they're not able to progress smoothly through the regular curriculum, then the IEP doesn't have to aim for grade level advancement, but the program should be appropriately ambitious in light of the circumstances. And the court says because for those students who are fully integrated in the regular classroom, where we say it's enough for them to advance grade to grade, like Amy Rowley did, they say that's appropriately ambitious for most children in the regular classroom. If they're meeting our state academic standards, they're achieving those and advancing grade to grade, that's appropriately ambitious for regular education students, and it's appropriately ambitious for special education students who are fully integrated in the regular classroom. But when that type of advancement isn't possible, then we want to make sure that the program's appropriately ambitious in light of their circumstances. So shortly after the Endrew opinion was released, the United States Department of Education released a question and answer document, which is really helpful as well. I passed that around to you. It's really good to break this opinion down for anyone who wants to read it. For example, it talks about that more than de minimis standard. What does de minimis mean? It's a Latin term which means too trivial or minor to consider. So it does a really good job of explaining things to everyone so everyone can read and understand this opinion. But what's really interesting about this question and answer document that's developed by US Ed is their focus on meeting challenging objectives. Meeting challenging objectives was only mentioned maybe once or twice in the Endrew opinion, but it is littered throughout this question and answer document. So clearly that is what the U.S. Department of Education is focusing on, is meeting these challenging objectives. I think that's probably because we just had new federal legislation a few years ago, the Every Student Succeeds Act, that talk about challenging state objectives, and I think they're tying these two together, the Endrew opinion with that new federal law. It's important to note that this is just guidance. It's not a legal decision. So this is guidance to schools, to districts, to parents on how the department actually views the Endrew decision. So this is some language I pulled out of that Q&A document that I think is telling. The IEP must include annual goals that aim to improve educational results and functional performance for each child with a disability. We know that. But I think it's important, and I think we're going to see, hopefully, that ARC teams focus more on those annual goals, not just copying them over year to year like happened in the Endrew decision, but actually taking a look at the goals for the child. What is appropriately ambitious for that student in that situation to try to move them forward regarding their education. Each child with a disability must be offered an IEP that is designed to provide access to instructional strategies and curricula aligned to both challenging state academic content standards and ambitious goals. So we want to be sure, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that sentence, based on the unique circumstances of that child. I think it's going to be very important for us to start looking at the goals and how they're both tied to the academic standards as well as be measurable for the student. Not just one or the other. Not just tied to the state standards, but not be measurable, and not just measurable, but not tied to standards, but actually have both of those in place. So each child's IEP must include, among other things, information and accurate statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance and measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals. Those present levels of academic achievement, I think I'm happy that the department focused on those. They were called out slightly in the opinion, but that's really important because that's kind of the starting point in our IEP document, what the present levels are. So if we just say, little Johnny doesn't read on grade level, well, that doesn't really tell us much. It's not a really good statement of current academic achievement. A lot of times we like to encourage people to use the rule that the current level of academic performance, we should be able to write it, and then everybody on the IEP team get up and leave, and completely new teachers, parents, people come in, and using that should be able to write a goal. So if your present level says little Johnny doesn't read at grade level, and someone new came in and looked at that, there's no way they could write a goal for little Johnny based on that. The present levels really should be detailed enough that someone new could come in and write an appropriate goal based on those present levels. So I think that's really where we'll see, hopefully at least, some change based on the Endrew opinion. I think that's really where it's going to occur, and I tell you that based on this next slide. So Perry Zerkel, I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. He's a professor at Lehigh University. He does extensive research in the field of IDEA and how hearing officers and courts rule on these matters. Following Endrew, put together a little document and did some research and found that there were 34 cases that had been heard by a hearing officer but hadn't proceeded up to the next appeal level whenever Endrew was decided. So that's to say there were 34 cases that were decided by the hearing officer based on old law, and then went up and were decided on appeal based on new law, the new Endrew opinion. And he looked to see how many of those changed when we applied the new law. What type of change was there? Only 2 of the 34 had a change. So we're not seeing a big change as far as outcomes of cases. I think where we probably see a big change in this matter is in those actual ARC meetings, where we talk more extensively about what the present levels of academic performance are, where we talk more extensively about writing ambitious goals that are measurable and tied to state academic standards, what is really in that child's best interest to push them forward based on this new standard. Now remember, Deal that we talked about, in light of the standard applied by the 10th Circuit. The 10th Circuit had the standard that said anything more than de minimis is FAPE, and in Kentucky we had the standard that said it had to be meaningful. So, I think that the previous standard applied by Kentucky since 2004 is much closer to Endrew than it was to the 10th Circuit, merely more than de minimis. So I don't think we're going to see a large change in the outcome of opinions based on this Endrew standard. I think where this makes a big impact is at the school level, in the IEP teams, parents, teachers, administrators using this US Ed guidance document to have better discussions about how we plan out the IEP for students. So that's my comment, changing the ARC approach. So that's all I've got. Discussion, questions, Melanie?